global trade is shifting dramatically. For decades, the US was the hub of hyper-globalization. Goods, money, and services flowed freely, and American consumers enjoyed abundant, low-cost imports. But today, October 3, 2025, that era is ending. Major economies are pulling back, reducing exports to the US and others. This isn't a temporary blip, it's a strategic realignment. National security, economic self-interest, and shifting alliances are driving countries to prioritize their own needs. Nations are asking, how do we protect our people from shortages? How do we secure critical resources? How can trade serve our geopolitical goals? The US now faces supply chain instability and rising prices as countries like China, Russia, Mexico, and Germany restrict exports. America must rethink its global economic role and relationships. Yet, amid this pullback, Canada is doubling down on its partnership with the US, signing a landmark billion-dollar deal. This contrast highlights a new world order. Trade is no longer just about efficiency, but about trust, shared values, and strategic alignment. The old system, where economics and politics were separate, is gone. A new era is emerging, with nations forming economic blocs based on security and reliability. The US must adapt to this new reality, where access to global goods can no longer be taken for granted. This is the story of a world reorganizing itself for a new age of trade. China's role in this trade shift is pivotal. Once the world's factory, China is now pivoting to become a high-tech powerhouse. Beijing is restricting exports of critical minerals like gallium and germanium, vital for semiconductors and military tech. This is a direct response to US tech restrictions on China, turning supply chains into a battleground. By controlling these minerals, China reminds the US that global trade is a two-way street. American tech firms now face tough choices. Pay more for alternative sources or risk production slowdowns. This exposes a vulnerability created by decades of offshoring. China's strategy isn't just retaliation, it's ambition. By limiting raw exports, it pushes for more high-value manufacturing at home. China wants to move up the value chain, designing and building the world's most advanced products. The reduction in exports is a key tactic in China's quest to reshape the global economic order. The US must now confront the risks of relying on a strategic rival for essential tech inputs. Russia is wielding trade as a weapon. In response to Western sanctions, Moscow has slashed natural gas exports to Europe, triggering an energy crisis and global inflation. Russia's strategy goes beyond energy. It's restricted fertilizer and noble gases, threatening food security and semiconductor production worldwide. These moves are not traditional trade policy, they're economic warfare, designed to divide Western allies and weaken support for Ukraine. Every export cut serves a strategic purpose, showing that economic interdependence can be a vulnerability. For the US, the impact is felt through higher global energy prices and inflation. Russia's actions are a wake-up call. Relying on authoritarian regimes for critical resources is risky. The US and its allies are now scrambling to secure supply chains and reduce dependencies. The assumption that trade would always flow freely, regardless of politics, is over. Economic security is now as important as military security. Export restrictions aren't just the domain of US rivals. Close partners are turning inward too. Mexico, under USMCA, is restricting white corn exports to protect its food supply and control inflation, even at the cost of trade friction with the US. It's also banning imports of genetically modified corn, challenging American exporters and straining the trade relationship. India, the world's top rice exporter, has restricted rice and wheat exports to keep domestic prices in check for its 1.4 billion citizens. These moves show that, when forced to choose, nations will feed their own people first. India's long-standing policy of strategic autonomy means it uses tariffs and export bans to shield its economy, regardless of global needs. For the US, these actions mean more price volatility and uncertainty for basic commodities. The new reality: access to food and resources is no longer guaranteed, even from allies. Trade is now about national survival, not just profit. Even export-driven powerhouses are rethinking their strategies. Saudi Arabia, once the world's oil supplier, is cutting production to maximize revenue for its Vision 2030 transformation, diversifying into petrochemicals, tourism, and tech. The kingdom is also exploring new partnerships, including with China, and considering trading oil and currencies other than the US dollar. This marks a shift away from its traditional oil-for-security relationship with America. In Europe, Germany's reliance on cheap Russian gas left it vulnerable after the Ukraine war. Now Germany is de-risking, diversifying supply chains, reducing dependence on China, and tightening export controls on sensitive goods. This isn't full decoupling, but a move toward resilience and selectivity. Germany's pivot signals a broader shift. Economic security and political alignment now rival efficiency as top priorities. The old model of globalization is being replaced by one focused on stability and trust. The world's biggest economies are preparing for a more uncertain, fragmented future. Brazil, a top exporter of soybeans, beef, and iron ore, is rethinking its export model. Environmental concerns, especially Amazon deforestation, are driving new regulations that could limit agricultural expansion and reduce export volumes. This shift could raise prices for U.S. consumers and businesses that rely on Brazilian goods. Brazil is also pushing to process more raw materials domestically, turning iron ore into steel, soybeans into oil, to capture more value and create skilled jobs. Policies like export taxes or restrictions on raw commodities may follow, encouraging domestic industry. This would impact American industries dependent on cheap Brazilian resources. Brazil's evolving strategy reflects a global trend, prioritizing long-term national development over raw export volume. Environmental, social, and governance factors are now shaping trade policy. The era of simply extracting and exporting raw resources is ending. While most nations are pulling back, Canada is leaning in, deepening its economic partnership with the U.S. A new billion-dollar deal symbolizes this commitment, focusing on critical minerals, energy security, and advanced manufacturing. Canada is embracing friendshoring, building supply chains with trusted allies, not rivals. The pandemic and global conflicts exposed the risks of relying on hostile nations for key goods. Canada's stable resources and skilled workforce make it the ultimate friend-shored partner. This partnership aims to reduce dependence on China and Russia, enhancing North American security. As global trade becomes less predictable, Canada's reliability is a strategic asset for the U.S. The U.S.-Canada alliance is a cornerstone of the new era, strong, trusted, and resilient. This global trade realignment has real consequences for Americans. The era of ultra-cheap, abundant imports is ending. As countries restrict exports, prices rise and supply chains become less reliable. Higher energy, food, and tech costs will hit household budgets. For businesses, the old playbook of offshoring for efficiency is obsolete. The new imperative, resilience. Companies are diversifying suppliers, reshoring, and nearshoring production, even if it's costly and complex. This transition will take years and create uncertainty. The trade-off: less efficiency and variety, but greater security and stability. The U.S. is moving from fragile, hyper-optimized supply chains to stronger, more trusted partnerships. For American families, this marks the end of one economic era and the uncertain start of another. Adapting to this new world will be challenging, but it's essential for long-term resilience.